Striking. Now, Guntars has whetted our appetite, and we'll continue on now with part 2. So, Guntars, I'll remove this thing I'm standing on so you can look normal sized.
We do it every Sunday. So we are moving into second part of this presentation. Topic still is the origin of the scriptures and the formation of the canon. First part we look at the Old Testament and what we know about the formation of the Old Testament canon and about its origin. So part 2 we will look at the New Testament. So how did we get our New Testament? And again, initially I just want you to reflect a little bit on what is the New Testament. Again, we can say it's a truly unique book or collection of books. 27 books, all of them were written in Koine Greek, which was a vernacular of that time, widely used in Roman Empire. And again, it includes quite a unique period of time from before birth of John the Baptist and Jesus Christ up to the end of times and the new creation, new heaven and new earth. And if you think about Bible as a whole, it covers unique period of time from before the creation till the new creation, all that was and will be. So, as well, of course, it includes most important events of that time. Unique authors, we have 8 or 9 human authors, depending on who wrote the letter to Hebrews. All of these documents were written between 40s and 90s of 1st century. All the documents of the New Testament, we can say, were written before the death of the last apostle, John. Roughly around 95, and that's a significant historical detail, because as John was still alive by the end of 1st century, when all the other New Testament documents were written and already in circulation, he was the one who just proofread them to say that yes, this is true apostolic message, this is how things happen. So that's a historical detail, but again quite significant. Of course, key uniqueness when it comes to authors is again God Himself, the Holy Spirit, who led all the authors of the New Testament. We have unique protagonists and apostles, but most importantly, of course, Jesus Christ, true God and true man, who came and lived among us. We have unique worldview, and again we can say that New Testament worldview is consistent with the Old Testament worldview. It simply assumes understanding about of this world as presented in the Old Testament, and it describes the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies and promises, all of them in Jesus Christ, as we can read in 2 Corinthians 1:20. And it also has unique purpose, and I think that John, as the last living apostle, summarizes it. It's at the end of his gospel. I'll read these words once more. Pastor Darren did it already once. These are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in His name. John wrote it referring to his own gospel, but we can apply these John's words to all the New Testament. So today we will again we'll try to argue that first we know a lot about the origin of the New Testament. We know a lot about the formation of the New Testament canon. And we know that we have received the same message, the same words of the Lord that were originally addressed to us. So, argument 1, we know a lot about the origins of the New Testament. Remember, as a British scholar Richard Bauckham put it, what kind of events do we remember the best? Those who are unique, highly emotional, and often repeated. And we probably can say that all of these criteria apply to Jesus' life, to what happened with him. So to his annunciation, his conception, his childhood. We do not have too much material, obviously, about Jesus' childhood. Just little glimpses here and there. Jesus' baptism and temptations. It's significant. Jesus' baptism is mentioned in all 4 Gospels. That's the beginning of his public ministry. And right after his baptism, he proceeds to be tempted by Satan in wilderness. And so Jesus' public ministry, again, it took place before so many eyewitnesses, but it also was accompanied by, as we would say, signs and miracles, which confirmed that he is what he claimed to be the Son of God. Jesus' sufferings, crucifixion and death. And again, it's interesting if you think about gospel accounts, these last few days of Jesus' life, they take up not the most, but big part, significant part of gospel accounts. So emphasizing that this was the center and fulfillment of Jesus' mission. And of course his resurrection and ascension again before eyes of many eyewitnesses. So all of these are unique, highly emotional and often retold events. And that's why we actually have almost the same story, almost the same events in our creed, in Apostles' Creed. So we can say it all together. I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell. On the 3rd day he rose again. He ascended into heaven, is seated at the right hand of God, the Almighty Father, from where he will come to judge the living and the dead. Amen, indeed. So, how do we know? How do we know about all these events which took place in Jesus' time? From the testimonies of eyewitnesses. And if we spoke about the Old Testament as a testimonies, to great extent as testimonies of eyewitnesses, then much more about the New Testament. You see, all the authors of the Gospels were either eyewitnesses themselves or gathered information from eyewitnesses of these events. So Matthew and John, they were among Jesus' apostles. Mark was one of those who were pretty much present at many events during Jesus' life. He was also, according to church tradition, translator of Apostle Peter while he was in Rome. So Mark's account would be basically Peter's testimony. And when we come to the Luke, we can read in first 4 verses of Luke's Gospel how carefully he examined sources from which he gathered this information. And if you think, Paul was already on his mission trips by the end of 40s. So Jesus' resurrection and ascension, 30 or so, it just some 15, 17, 18 years later. And Luke was accompanying Paul in his mission trips. So Luke was already mature Christian by that time. And when Luke speaks about getting information from those who handed it over, he may have seen Jesus' family. He may have spoken with the apostles. They all were around at that time. So we can say that all gospel accounts come from eyewitness testimonies. And the same to great extent is true regarding other writings of the New Testament. Paul, you know the story of the Paul, Road of Damascus and further revelations. Apostle Peter, James and Jude, brothers of Jesus. Luke, friend and helper of Peter, and also obviously acquaintance of other prominent figures in early church. And besides, we can say that New Testament also contain explicitly that saying that these are witnesses of these are testimonies of eyewitnesses. And I'm almost tempted to read one more of these verses from first letter of John, chapter 1, when he begins and he says that what we saw, what we heard, what we touched, what our hands touched. So he's so excited, he writing about it. Here, not or Peter, when he says we are not retelling you some kind of myth, we are telling you what we saw, what we experienced. We were present together with Christ, with the word of life. So when we have, you will have in your notes many references to New Testament where different documents of New Testament explicitly say that these are testimonies of eyewitnesses. And you see, it's also important for us as Christians when we think about our mission. What are we called? What are we sent to do? To give testimonies, to testify, to witness about what God has done in history. So it's not teaching about principles for good life or for success or whatever. It's simply retelling what God has done in history. So that's our mission. That's our task as Jesus' disciples. What is interesting, and I have you a source attached, reference to book, which is very, very interesting, but testimonies by ancient Roman and Greek historians confirm the same. This Jesus event, his story, his resurrection are mentioned in several historians of that time. Among them, I have no idea how to pronounce his name, but Talos and Gaius Plinius Secundus, Roman official, Cornelius Tacitus, Roman historian, Josephus Flavius, a Roman historian of Jewish origin, and few more. So we have these testimonies from secular sources of that time, where they confirm, they refer to this event of Jesus. So we have such a wealth of information. So what were they testifying about? And we can say they testified about the gospel event or about Christ event. So what does this word gospel mean? What does this word gospel mean? And sometimes we may look at our four gospels and think, oh, it's kind of literary genre or something along these lines. But actually, meaning of word gospel comes from two backgrounds, both from Old Testament and also from secular culture of Roman Empire. And in both of these contexts, gospel, we can say, simply means report about events, good news about something that happened. Good news about some things that happen. It's not teaching. These are not principles for good life or so. This is report, account of some things that happen. So in Old Testament, word gospel is mostly used in context of victory reports. So messenger returns from the battle and says, yes, we won, good news, good news. So he reports actually some things that happen, some things that has impact and importance for all those who receive their message. We have also received Gospel of Caesar Augustus. And you may wonder, what is that? That's one of Roman emperors. And again, we can see simply how word gospel, evangelion, good news, was used at that time. So when the Caesar Augustus became emperor, these were good news for him. So when he sent messengers everywhere and said, proclaim the good news. That's my reign. That's my time. And you see, this side of reporting, meaning of reporting and meaning of announcing something that has happened has also a great significance for our understanding of the gospel. Because the same we can apply to this Christ event, gospel about Christ. It is about something that happen, some things that forever change the course of history. The new reign has begun, and all authority is given to the Son of God, Jesus Christ. So this is how we can essentially summarize what the gospel is. Some things that happen that changed everything. So we may ask question: how many gospels do we have? One gospel. We have only one gospel. We have 4 gospel accounts, but we have only one gospel. One gospel which is gospel of Jesus Christ, which tells us what happened in history, what God did in history. And you see, it's interesting when we look at the ancient manuscripts. Title for these manuscripts are not like a Matthew's gospel or Mark's gospel or Luke's gospel. Titles are always the gospel according to Matthew, the gospel according to Luke, the gospel according to Mark. So they all refer to this one event. So these are not different gospels. They all try to describe this one event, one thing, a big thing which Christ did in history. So we can say, yes, we have one gospel and 4 gospel accounts. And other New Testament writings, we can say simply explain the implications of this Christ event, what it means for us, for our lives, that all authority is given to Christ, that he is risen. So, argument 2. We know a lot about the formation of the New Testament canon. And that's important one. And so which were the earliest documents in the New Testament? When we open it, what do we read? We may think that Gospels were the earliest, because that's how we proceed. Gospels, Acts, and then letters. When in fact, the earliest documents of the New Testament are Paul's letters. So Paul's letters, which were written late 40s and 50s and 60s. So yes, I skipped a little bit. So how many do we have these Paul's letters today? 13. We have 13, and it's open question regarding Hebrews. Was Apostle Paul author of Hebrews or someone else? But how many Paul's letters were there originally? Because we know that at least of 2 more letters to Corinthians, there was letter to Laodiceans, and we can guess probably there were more. So our question would be, do we have the right ones? Do we have the right letters? So how did we get these which we have today in our New Testament? There's something we need to know about historical side of writing the documents, writing the letters in New Testament times. There were authors and there were scribes. Author is the one who is in charge of letter, whose message is written down. And often authors used scribes just as a helpers to write down the whole thing. And we can see explicitly it mentioned in Romans 16:22, where Tertius just says, I'm writing this one. So he was actually physically writing, not Paul. Similarly, we can see in 1 Corinthians, at the end of 1 Corinthians, where also we can see that maybe someone else, not the Paul himself, wrote this letter. So authors and scribes. Another thing which is important, we think about Gospels or letters as a written document. What do you do with written documents? You read them. So it was not the case in first century. Gospels and letters, they were not written for you to read. They were written for you to perform orally. Remember we saw this ancient Greek manuscript, Greek text, all capital letters, no spacing, and if you receive a letter like this, how do you know, with what emotions exactly author kind of put it forward? And so oral performance was very, very important. So messenger was very important. Messenger who delivered this letter, so he can also deliver emotions of the author, if you would say. If you write something very important and if you send it, what else do you do at the same time? You make a copy. You make a copy for your own for yourself. And this is again something we know from the first century, that authors used to make copies. That was regular practice. You write a letter and you make one copy for yourself, if this letter is important, and you may make few more copies for friends or for someone else. And we can see even from the testimonies of the New Testament that it's probably the case that Paul wrote not simply one copies, but in many occasions he may have written several copies of his letters, and the same applies also to other authors. So we know from examples of Roman philosophers and politicians, Seneca and Cicero, that when they wrote their letters, they made their copies and they actually put their copies together as a collection. So they were authors of their own collection of letters. And it's interesting that in 2 Timothy 4:13, we can see Paul asks to bring him something which would be a Greek word for kind of set of writings. And it's believed that what he is referring to is actually his own collection of his letters. Paul's own collection of his letters. So obviously he wrote these letters to different congregations, and he may have kept the copies of those letters which he considered to be important ones. So a case is made for Paul's own collection by several scholars, where they look at the practice of first century and also at different testimonies from early church fathers and also from manuscripts. And we will go through these testimonies in a minute. But you see, the idea would be that those letters of Paul, which we have today, they were not somehow randomly selected from many others, but actually Paul himself might have gathered these 13 and put them together as a set of his letters. So what do we know to make such a claim? So first, testimonies from the early church fathers. Clement of Rome, Bishop of Rome, wrote a letter to Corinthians. That church was still a mess in his time as well, so they just kept writing letters. But what he does, what is interesting, in his letter, he refers to Paul's letter, singular. He refers to Paul's letter, singular. So he writes it around 95 AD, before the end of first century. But then he quotes from 8 or 9 Paul's letters. So he refers as a singular, but then he quotes several Paul's letters. So that's one of indications that actually there might have been just a codex, book of collection of Paul's letters, which he's referring to. Ignatius, another church father, Papius, Polycarpus, they all, Justin Martyr, they all refer to the same letters of Paul in their writings, which we have in our canon today. So they never quote other Paul's letters. They quote exactly the same letters which we have in our canon today. So, and we also have testimonies from early manuscripts. So what is interesting, among early manuscripts, we have them all as a codexes, as a sets of Paul's letters. There are no single letters floating somewhere around. So they are as a codexes, and which again indicates that maybe that was the only form, only way how Paul's letters were known in the early church, as a set of Paul's letters. So, summarizing on canonicity of Paul's letters, we know he began his ministry just literally a few years after Jesus' resurrection and ascension. God confirmed Paul's authority before many eyewitnesses. Remember this principle of Moses. God himself calls, he affirms the authority of this person by doing things which we are normally not able to do. And he does it before many eyewitnesses. We can read in Acts about miracles performed by Paul to affirm that his message actually comes from God. So his letters were written between 40s and 60s. And this is interesting when you look at 2 Peter 3:16. Peter talks about Paul's letters, about Paul's writings, and he says they are kind of difficult writings, difficult to read, and people sometimes misunderstand and misinterpret. But what is interesting, what the point he's making, he says, as also other scriptures. So what he is essentially saying, that Paul's letters and other scriptures, he's putting them on the same level as the scriptures. And that's already during the lifetime of Peter. So he describes these letters as having authority similar to scriptures. So, and we know that by the end of the first century, they were well known as possibly as a codex, as a set of Paul's letters. So, and of course, testimony from early manuscripts confirm that they, spelling mistake, I'll jump to the next page. They all came as codexes. So, Gospels. Gospels are another big section. So, written by the apostles or according to their message. Remember, Matthew and John, they were among 12 apostles of Jesus. Mark was closely associated with Peter, and Luke closely associated with Paul, and probably many other eyewitnesses, possibly among them also members of Jesus' family and possibly other apostles. So why were Gospels written? The command was given to make the disciples of all nations. So apostles, seeing that they won't be able to do it in their lifetime, actually try to write down this message so that the one gospel described in 4 accounts could be brought to many nations. So also Gospels are believed to be written between late 40s and 95, mid of 90s of first century. John's Gospel being the last one. And remember again this historical detail that John lived till the end of first century. So he was the one who actually could confirm that what we have, what writings were around, were really apostolic teaching, trustworthy apostolic teaching. Of course, we have this ongoing debate which of Gospels was written first, and some argue actually that John might have been written first instead of last, but then there is a question about priority of Mark or Matthew, and actually recently quite compelling case was made that Matthew's Gospel could have been written even probably before some of Paul's letters, but we will probably will not know it for sure in this life. So why these 4 Gospels? What about other Gospels? So dozens of Gospels. Have you heard this story that initially church possessed many Gospels, and then evil church did its power games, or some kind of unknown forces got rid of those others which they didn't like and kept only these 4, which kind of matched with their ideology or agenda. And sure, we can say it's such a nice story, but that's all. It's only story. These four Gospels were known from at least the beginning of the 2nd century, again as a codex, as a set, as a 4 Gospels bind together in one book. So it was called Megabiblion, the big book, and already at least from the beginning of 2nd century, these 4, together with Paul's letters, they were read in divine service as the scriptures, as the word of God, already in the beginning of 2nd century. Yes. So again, what kind of testimonies do we have from church fathers emphasizing these 4 and not some others? The same Clement, Bishop of Rome, in the same letter, he quotes, writing in 90s, he quotes from 3 Gospels. Possibly John's Gospel wasn't written yet or wasn't available to him, but he quotes from 3 Gospels, from our 3 Gospels. Ignatius, very beginning of 2nd century, he already quotes from all 4 Gospels, but from none else. Papius, writing in roughly 130, quotes 4 Gospels. Justin Martyr, in around 160 AD, he tried to bring together in one document kind of harmony of 3 Gospels, of our first 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Not harmony of 10 or harmony of 6, harmony of 3. His student, yes, that's the name. So he actually went further and tried to bring together 4 Gospels. Diatesteron means in Greek through 4, kind of story through 4 Gospels. Not 5, not 7, not 10, not 12, 4 Gospels. So they operate only with these, our canonical ones. We have translation of the Gospels in other languages already from first centuries. So guess which Gospels were translated into other languages? Our 4 Gospels. Never any others. So why would you translate some things that was not scriptures? By the end of 2nd century, Irenaeus, Clement, and Seraphion, they wrote 3 church fathers. They wrote about the Gospels as received, as those which we have received. So what is interesting, that's an end of 2nd century. Irenaeus, he was in Lyon, the territory of France. Yes, Lyon. Yes, in territory of France. Clement was in Alexandria, Egypt. Seraphion was in Antioch, territory of today's Syria. So they are in very different locations. And they all speak about these 4 Gospels as those which we have received. Again, interesting historical detail. Irenaeus, bishop in Lyon, he was personally known with a Polycarp. And Polycarp knew personally Apostle John. So Irenaeus knew Polycarp, and Polycarp knew John. So the question is, could Irenaeus knew which Gospels actually were written by the apostles? And the answer is, of course he could. Of course, he almost had a direct access to the source, to one of apostles, through his teacher, student Polycarp. Testimonies from manuscripts. Sorry, someone made this mistake in my PowerPoint. Codices from the beginning of 2nd century. Again, we almost have no manuscripts where Gospels would be on their own. They always as a set of books, as this megabiblion, as it was called in early church, and always these 4 always these four, not others. And never any other gospel, so-called gospel, has been found together with these canonical gospels. So that's what manuscripts simply show us. So, what about these other gospels? Is there a conspiracy? Was there a conspiracy in early church to hide the truth from us? And now bright people come and try to discover. Probably you all have heard about a book by Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code. Yes? Have you read it? Yeah. It's interesting. We had that's already quite a while ago. One of professors from St. Louis Seminary visiting in Latvia shortly after Da Vinci Code was published, and he told a funny story. He said he received call from congregation, and they said, "Could you come and explain us all these things about this Da Vinci Code and etc." So he was happy to go to enlighten this congregation. When he arrived in this congregation, he realized that's actually Mormon church. Even they were scared. What's going on? So, but you see, books like these, they can shape people's perception in society much more than we can. So it's enough to write one book like this, and so many will be happy to believe whatever lies are told. So when it's difficult to keep, to persuade them in truth. Elaine Pagel is another contemporary academician who likes to bring up like sensational stories that we have discovered something which will change your understanding about Christianity. So truth will finally be revealed, and then something, and it just disappears. So there is no conspiracy. The church always knew about these other gospels, always knew, and church fathers actually wrote about them and refuted them for the sake of Christians. So, what about these other gospels? Are they real, or are they some kind of myth? They are real. They're as real as they could be. But there is something there are few things which we need to remember. Again, I will have all of this in my notes. You can take it with you. And there are a few things we need to remember regarding these other gospels. They have nothing to do with Christ. They are not about the gospel of Christ. Even those who are called gospels. Remember, our four gospels, they were entitled the gospel according to, while these others actually are entitled Thomas' gospel, or so, showing that it belongs to these people who claim to be authors. So, few things about them. One, they were written much later, as earliest maybe end of 2nd century, beginning of 3rd century, some of them 4th century, so they are much later. They were written by other religious groups, not by Christians. So they are in a way not connected with the Christian, with our message at all. So they were written by a group which we cannot exactly define what exactly they believe, because we have testimonies about various of their beliefs. But one thing is quite clear. They had totally different worldview. Remember, we spoke that biblical worldview is unique. Gracious God created and ordered everything that exists, and He is still present creatively as our Creator. He came to redeem His fallen creation, and He is going to restore His creation at the end. So we will have new heavens and new earth. In these Gnostic Gospels, they have totally different understanding. So they believe this world was created by some kind of lower level evil deity, which was kind of foolish enough to create something material. Everything material is evil in itself. So it's not spirit, it's matter. So it's not good. Salvation, they mention Christ, and salvation is not accomplished for us by Christ, but salvation is achieved by specific knowledge Gnosis, that's why this name, Gnostics. If you are enlightened by this knowledge, then you can be saved. And salvation is not, we believe in the resurrection of the body and life everlasting. It is we believe in that we will get rid of these bodies. We will get rid of everything material. We will return back to the whatever, pleroma, a good source which was in the beginning. So we can see that these other gospels, they represent different worldview. They belong to different group of people. And what's also interesting, they never appear together with the four gospels. Okay, testimonies from manuscripts, they never appear together with the four gospels. And the four never appeared, any of these four never appeared together with these others. So summary on Gospels, what we can say, we know written by the apostles or people very close to the apostles, written between 40s and 90s AD, authoritative right away. Justin Martyr, second century Christian teacher, philosopher, he wrote that Gospels and Paul's letters are read in the divine service. So he was reflecting back as a practice of Christians, practice which characterized Christians. And that's a middle of 2nd century. Well known by the beginning of the 2nd century as a codex, as a set of books, not separate. Codex Megabiblion. And testimonies from early manuscripts, always these four, never any other. So what about other New Testament writings? So in 2nd century, considered as authoritative also Acts, 1 Peter, 1 John and Hebrews. So they are quoted as authoritative writings of coming from the apostles, not perceived maybe exactly as important as the Gospels and Paul's letters, but already acknowledged as inspired writings in God-given books by the end of 2nd century. Revelation, James, 2nd Peter, 2nd and 3rd John and Judas, they were accepted as authoritative locally, not by whole church in first centuries, and only gradually by the 4th century they kind of made their way into canon. But again, in early church they were never considered equivalent in authority with the Gospels or Paul's letters. So summarizing for the argument too, that we actually know about the formation of canon. Paul's letters perceived as the scriptures already in the 1st century and read in the service, divine service. 4 Gospels perceived as the scriptures and read in the service in the beginning of the 2nd century. Acts, 1 Peter, 1 John and Hebrews perceived as authoritative in the 2nd century. So, which makes more than 90% of the New Testament canon, the most important 90%. And then other writings known only locally, not accepted by the whole church initially, and by the 4th century, the canon was mostly established, even if there was no formal list of the canonical books. At least we do not have one before 357. But what we know that there was never a council or formal decision that would set the boundaries of the New Testament. And it's kind of interesting again to reflect that no council or whatever decision could give authority to books which did not have them already before. So even if we do not have list of God-given, authoritative, apostolic, inspired books, we know from the church history, from the formation of canon, that those books actually were treated as God's given because of their apostolic origin. So argument 3, which is then last part of my presentation. We know that we have received the same message, the same words of the Lord that were originally given to us. So how do we know it? What are our earliest New Testament manuscripts? Remember, in Old Testament, for a long time the earliest we had was 10th and 11th century, and then after discoveries in Qumran and then later in other places, they found lots of manuscripts which actually are from 2nd and 3rd century before Christ, which make the difference between the writing of the latest books of the Old Testament and the time of manuscripts just 200 years, 2 centuries. So what about the New Testament? Possibly a couple from the 1st century. It's not confirmed yet, but just a few years ago there were a couple of manuscripts discovered, and all the research data are not published yet. They are not available publicly, but idea was that at least a couple of these manuscripts could be from the late 1st century. So these are fragments of Mark, which would make the difference between writing of Gospels and earliest manuscripts just this big or this small. So, but no, it's not confirmed. What we know for sure, we have more than 10 manuscripts from the 2nd century, and that's the earliest one. Doesn't look much like book, right? Or very small book, and that's a fragment from John, written from both sides, and I'm not sure how exactly, but no, there's so much research done on this manuscript, but they were able to identify that it's been a part of Codex actually. P66, again, one of early manuscripts. You can see the writing, all capital letters, no spacing. It would be rather difficult to read them without specific skills. P75, again, yeah, you can see the same style of. So we have more than 40 from the 3rd century. So these are our earliest manuscripts. But what is interesting, and I find it kind of fascinating, just 100 years ago, or yes, so there was great discovery in Oxyrhynchus. Yes, I think Oxyrhynchus. That's a town in Egypt, and they found a how do you call a place where you bring your trash? Rubbish dump. Yes, with it's a nice finding, right? Nice finding, and but in this rubbish dump they found so many manuscripts from before time of Christ and after time of Christ, and different kind of not it's not biblical manuscripts, but just different pieces of different documents which help to restore, to create a picture of what life looked like at that culture, what was writing like, etc. And what was interesting, they found some records from libraries, and these library records described how long one manuscript was kept in the library before it was kind of rewritten or copied again. And what was written, that from 150 to 400 years, that was lifetime for one manuscript kept in library. Now put together this piece with the dating of our earliest manuscripts and with the time when New Testament was written. If most of New Testament documents were written second part of 1st century, they may still have been around, let's say, 100 years later. And we have documents already from 2nd century. So there's actually overlap in time. Possibly those copies which we have, those manuscripts which we have, they may have coexisted already with the originals written by apostles. No, doesn't help us much to understand about Canon or so, but just again historically, we can see how close all our knowledge come to the moment of writing of the New Testament. how many New Testament manuscripts do we have? Greek, in ancient Greek, more than 5,800. And new are being discovered again. People just go to ancient libraries in monasteries where no one been for 100 years and actually searching what's there, and they keep finding manuscripts from 1st century, which I mentioned. They were actually found in one of monasteries, 7 or 8 of them, and now scholars are trying to date precisely the date of origin. So more and more are found all the time. In Latin, more than 10,000. In Coptic, Syriac, Armenian, Georgian, Arabic, in these all together, more than 10,000. And this is kind of interesting again. Of course, early church fathers, when they wrote something theological, they were quoting scriptures. And this is a big ongoing project where actually these quotes are brought together and systematized. And by today, we have more than 1 million quotes of the Bible from the church fathers. And as one involved in this research project mentioned, that even if in one day all the manuscripts, all the Bibles would disappear, New Testament, we could almost fully recover New Testament only from these quotes alone. So that's how much witness of the original text we have. So quality of these manuscripts. Do we have differences? It's true. We can say that we have more than 400,000 differences in these manuscripts. And it's on roughly 138 words of the New Testament. And if someone says, oh, there's so many differences in these manuscripts, how could you possibly believe? What we need to know, what kind of difference these are, what it actually means. Perspective we can take is that we possess right now more than 2,600,000 pages of New Testament, which would make roughly one difference on 6 pages. That's another perspective which we can take. So, but the most important question is, what kind of differences these are? Are the differences essential for the meaning of the New Testament? Do they change anything in the message? So we will briefly look at these differences. So first, and the largest, much larger group than others are simply spelling differences and spelling mistakes. For example, one of the most popular and probably could be the number one difference is in Greek, to make pronunciation easier when you read the text, often N is attached at the end of word. So, and some of scribes used to attach this end and some didn't. So it doesn't change anything, it doesn't add anything, doesn't take away anything. But no, these are one kind of these mistakes. Another mistakes are fitting in the same category are spelling mistakes. For example, in First Thessalonians 2:7, instead of Greek word nepioi, they have hippoi, which is a small change, but it has quite a radical impact on translation. So instead of Paul saying we were gentle among you, this spelling mistake would say that we were horses among you. So I guess we can find out which was original meaning quite for sure. Second group of differences is actually little differences, presence or absence of articles, omitted articles or articles present, and I can relate to these differences so well. Your articles don't make any sense to me. Sorry for that. So I'm very much with those who can miss them or put in the wrong place, and or it could be differences in sequence of words. In Greek, sequence of words is not that important. It doesn't change the meaning of sentence. So because they have case endings which indicates which word goes together with which, and so it's different in English. You need to have kind of certain sequence. So in Greek it's much freer. So you can just change the sequence and it won't change anything in meaning. Jesus titles, sometimes the same place. One manuscript has Jesus, another manuscript has Jesus Christ, another manuscript has Christ Jesus. So you see, it really doesn't change much. So these are other second group of differences. Then there are differences which are kind of meaningful but dubious. For example, if in one manuscript instead of Christ suddenly we have God, and all other manuscripts simply have Christ, we can conclude from the majority that probably Christ was the original meaning. So, but you see, again, it does not change much in meaning of the text. Fourth group is meaningful and plausible differences, and they are much less than 1% of all of them. Mostly these are grammatical differences. For example, you would have different grammatical different grammatical tense. For example, in translation, instead of we have peace, we may have we would have peace. So changes which slightly change something, but again, that's why scholars use all these manuscripts trying to see which of these could be the original one. But no, again, these are really small differences, and there are only two passages which are kind of challenging, and of course we are used to have them in our Bibles. One is John 7:53 to 8:11, a passage of adulteress, Jesus and adulteress, and another is a long ending of Mark. Short ending would end with the words, "For they were afraid." So what's challenging with these? These two pericopes? In earlier manuscripts, this passage from John, it actually appears in different places, and it even appears connected to Luke's gospel. So it kind of travels and appears in different places. When it comes to Mark's ending, long ending, we actually have 3 long endings, which we know from early manuscripts. And none of earliest manuscripts of Mark's gospel actually, they do not contain this long ending. So there is good reason to believe that possibly verse 8 was the end of Mark's gospel as intended initially. And as I said, we are used to have them in our Bibles, and they will probably remain there. But even if we look at these two pericopes, they don't change much in our message, in the message of the Bible. So I'll read you a quote from Craig Evans, one of leading scholars in historicity of New Testament, and this is what he said, that there are more than 20,000 lines in the New Testament, and only 40 of them can be doubted. But none of these 40 contain any important teaching. So from 20,000 lines, only 40 can be kind of doubted. And of these 40, none of them contains any important teaching. So what else we can say about New Testament manuscripts? Just imagine if you had to rewrite it by hand. Wouldn't be easy. So one thing is that we actually most of them were copied by professional scribes, and you can imagine it wasn't easy task. So we have very nice comments on some of manuscripts which we have actually received, where scribes express their frustration with the process. So that's on one of them, it's actually written, "I feel weird today, don't know what has happened to me." So that's kind of side note on one of manuscripts, and Another one ends, thanks God, the end of the book. So they were working really hard to make it happen. Bruce Metzger, one of the greatest scholars of the New Testament manuscripts, one of leading scholars of New Testament manuscripts, and he spent more than 50 years studying New Testament manuscripts and kind of trying to figure out which variant came earliest. And so after 40 years of studying and working with the New Testament, so this is what he said in one of interviews. My work has increased the basis of my personal faith to see the firmness with which these documents have come down to us, with the multiplicity of copies, some of which are very ancient. I have asked questions all my life. I have dug into the text. I have studied this thoroughly, and today I know with confidence that my trust in Christ has been well placed, very well placed. So that's from someone who actually spent his life looking, reading, exploring these manuscripts, and a great testimony for us. So, summary for argument 3. Books were carefully copied by professional scribes. Of course, they sometimes got tired and so. And we have manuscripts as old as, no, it's wrong. Sorry, again, someone was playing with my PowerPoint. It's AD, but it's, you will have to remember. So there are no significant differences in the manuscripts that would challenge any of our teachings. So this is for argument 3, is that we actually have received the same text, the same words of God which apostles wrote down. So summary for the New Testament. We know about the origin of the New Testament events of that time through the eyes of eyewitnesses. And we know about the formation of the Old Testament canon. Again, we have plenty of testimonies from early church fathers. And we have so many manuscripts. So we know that we have got the right New Testament. And when it comes to our almost initial question, why is the Bible our only source and norm? And I would say it's not because of adjectives we can apply. It's not because we could say, oh, it's inspired or inerrant or infallible, etc. Not because we use these adjectives, but because it is the living God himself testifying about what he has done and spoken. It is God himself speaking to us. God himself speaking to us in his word. And we know a lot about both the origin of the Bible and also about the formation of the canon. So we know that our trust in the Bible as the Word of God is well placed, is very well placed. I think that's the end. That's what you. Yeah.
Questions from last time or this time, or comments?
Andrew Adele, I'm the pastor at St. John's Durban Court. Thank you very much for your enlightening talk. You might be interested to know that the dating on Clement of Rome, his 1 Corinthians, recently has been put at 70 AD.
Okay.
5 years earlier. I haven't seen that. It hasn't been contested as far as I know. Yeah, it's a Roman Catholic scholar. Thank you. And Pancreatus. And Pancreatus, about 175 AD, writes about reporting from India, Matthew's Gospel there, written in the Hebrew, which Thomas may well have brought across in 54 AD.
So just to remind that Clement of Rome was bishop in Rome, the one who wrote letter to Corinthians dealing with their issues, and and where he mentioned one letter of Paul, but we're quoting several. And what Pastor Rudel just said, that it may be not just end of first century, it might have been actually some 20 years earlier, when Paul's letters already were circulating as a codex.
Oh, hello, Pastor Stephen Van Hook from Mount Barker. Should I stand up? Sorry. I don't have a question, as just a little comment that I thought is useful in this, that I've always found useful, and I often use when I'm talking to people about the whole formation of the canon of scriptures and the bringing it together, and all the different manuscripts and their variation. I remember seeing somewhere where someone had mentioned the similar details that had to do with the manuscripts of Shakespeare's works. And for example, one of his major plays like Macbeth, right? And just saying, that this is a text only 450 years old or so, and whereas with the New Testament, we're talking about something that's, 2,000 years old, and yet the manuscripts of Shakespeare are so much more varied and so much more, there's all kinds of different little variations here, and there's a missing scene here and a little bit of an extra bit in there. And, whereas if you then compared the variations of something like Shakespeare to the variations of something like New Testament, we're talking about something that's just chalk and cheese, And I've often found that very useful pictures, not just to take the New Testament, let's say, on our terms, but also on the terms of how most other documents throughout history, and how have they been passed, and the New Testament just lines up with so much more clarity. Yeah, sorry, I thought that was.
And that's exactly what Pastor Darin mentioned earlier, that if we compare how many manuscripts we have, comparing with other ancient documents, so much more. I think the second one in rating was Homer's Odyssey, might be with 600 or something manuscripts, and then the rest are 100, or a couple dozens, and Bible we have thousands and thousands. Mm-hmm.
Such as we have through the Quran and 1,000 years or 1,500 years through the Book of Mormon, but also the way those books are written, how they are distinct from Christian writings.
Remember, the question was how is our Bible, how are our Holy Scriptures different from scriptures of other religions, and we mentioned it already in beginning. Quran and Book of Mormon, they're claimed to be inspired, inerrant, and Word of God. And the huge difference is that God, who speaks to us through the Bible, He actually shows that He is in control of history. He promises, He prophesies it. He says, I'm gonna do this, and then He fulfills. And He says, I'm gonna do this, and He fulfills. While these other writings, they simply said, oh, God spoke, let's say God spoke through Muhammad like through tube. So God's word simply flew him, and no one else heard, so whatever. And we see that Bible is actually testimonies of eyewitnesses, God acting, speaking in the history. And I would say these are probably greatest, in my mind, that would be greatest difference. It's also interesting that in Islam, we are proud of our manuscripts, and we try to explore them to get as close as possible to the original text. And we admit we have 400,000 differences in New Testament manuscripts, yes? They don't change meaning, though. Islam claimed all the time that there are no variations whatsoever in Quran. And recently there's a big project started in Germany where they actually look at different manuscripts of Quran, and I'm not sure when the research data is going to be published, but initial information is there are so many differences which actually change meaning. So nope, that's another little comment.
Don't want to start a father-son dispute, but we have Dr. Lockwood and then followed by Dr. Lockwood. The younger got in before the senior.
I have a question, but can I just make a comment in response to the last speaker? Because I find this a very fascinating question. With something like the Quran, it goes entirely to the Prophet Muhammad, who went up on Mount Hira and claimed that he received all these revelations from God. Now, how many people witnessed this?
Mm-hmm.
One. No one else was there. No one else heard God speak. Just Muhammad. Then later, Muhammad was asked to, show the people a sign to confirm that he really came from God. And do you know what his answer was? The only sign you need is the Quran itself. Right? Now, you compare that with someone like Moses. He goes up on Mount Sinai and God speaks with him, and this happens in the sight of all Israel. And they hear God speaking to them, the Ten Commandments, and they all hear him speak. And just think of all the signs that were performed at the time of the Exodus to confirm the authority of Moses. And the same with the Gospels. 1 Corinthians records that there were more than 500 eyewitnesses of the resurrection. So this happened in the sight of everybody. Not just one man going up on a mountain claiming that he heard God talking to him. So I think that's pretty important difference. But I had a different question. I read through your notes earlier, and you had some stuff there about how the Gospels and the epistles of Paul were universally accepted everywhere within the early church, but some of the other, like Catholic epistles, were accepted in one place but not in another place, and it took some time before they were accepted everywhere in the church. Now that's going to be significant when I come to talk about Luther, so I'm just wondering if you could comment on that a little bit more, and this sort of question of the anti-legomena and the legumena, etc.
As I mentioned already, that almost from the beginning of 2nd century, the Gospels as a set of Gospels and Paul's letters were known everywhere in church and accepted on the same level as the Scriptures. During 2nd century, a few other of New Testament books received the same recognition, and then we have those which actually were called in early church anti-legomena, which mean books against which some of people spoke against. They did not agree that these should be included in canon. And among those we have a second letter of Peter, third letter of John, Judas, Revelation. They gradually made their way into canon. They gradually became accepted by the whole church. But as I mentioned already, they never were treated, they never received the same kind of attitude, the same authority. So if there was some kind of teaching, let's say in letter of Judas, which was not present in Paul's letters on Gospels, so we would not make kind of big doctrine out of it. We would look at Gospels and Paul's letters first. And that was also approach for interpretation for Luther as well. He took that Gospels and Paul's letters have to set the guidelines. And so if there is something in other documents which may contradict, which we may interpret differently than Gospels and Paul's letters should be used as guidelines.
One more.
Thanks so much, Guntars. It's been most enjoyable listening, and for us old guys to be able to sit back and be refreshed too. That's really great. Just a quick comment. Many of you, especially pastors, would be familiar with the New Testament scholar Rudolf Bultmann, who claimed that for example, that there are a lot of legends in the New Testament, in the Gospels. The infancy narratives are legends. By contrast, the last Pope, Benedict XVI, in one of his books, he was a very fine New Testament scholar himself, he, in reference to Luke's Gospel and Luke's sources, you referred to, Pope Benedict XVI believed that St. Luke sat down with Mary, the mother of our Lord, herself, and it's not at all improbable because we know that
Of time.
Acts
Yes,
1,
yes.
Acts 1, she's still there
Yes.
on the threshold of Pentecost.
Thank you. I'm going to cut off questions. We want to stay on time. Let's express our appreciation again for